Today is the Ahjin Guild's first official raid. The target? A massive A-rank gate. The Hunters Association insists on tagging along to inspect safety, but they're about to find out this isn't a raid. It's a massacre. Because I don't just lead a strike squad, I'm a walking guild. AI Anime and Manga presents. Before we head inside, leaving a like and a comment really helps the video reach the right audience. And don't forget to subscribe or join as a YouTube member for early access to new episodes. Now, let's begin the raid. It was Jinho's first time seeing an A-rank gate. He leaned his head back to take in the view up to the top of the portal.
Whoa.
The gate was so tall, it was impossible to take it all in at once when they were this close. Jinho's mouth had been agape for some 20 minutes already. Compared to that, my reaction to laying eyes on an A-rank gate for the first time had been anticlimactic. I teased him that his jaw was about to fall off.
Huh? Oh, sorry, boss. I've just never seen a gate this big before.
How would he have reacted to the gate at Gwangali Beach? I chuckled at the thought. Jinho rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed by his obvious amazement, and asked whether we would be okay without a collection or excavation team. I told him we would be fine, then summoned 30 elite shadow soldiers who had been with me the longest. These guys would take care of it. Jinho started at the soldiers' sudden appearance, but quickly caught on to what I was saying.
Aha, gotcha, boss.
With their black armor eyes, my minions always had an intimidating aura about them. At that moment, employees of the association approached the pair. Among them was a familiar face.
Hunter Sung.
Manager Woo.
May I start the inspection?
Please go ahead. I stepped aside and the shadow soldiers moved forward. Jinchul measured each soldier's magic power levels. Jinchul's eyes widened at the results. Behind his sunglasses, he thought in disbelief that all my minions were at least B rank, if not A. Jinchul could see that my soldiers and I easily passed the safety conditions for an A-rank gate permit. More importantly, I had many more minions at my disposal. If they also possessed similar levels of magic power, Jinchul's lip turned up on one side. People who argued whether this was preferential treatment of Hunter Sung did not know what they were talking about. Jinchul smiled lightly and shook his head before looking up and nodding at me.
I'm done. No problems here.
I returned the nod and smile. I was ready to start the raid, but had one last order of business. Reporters shouted from the other side of the police line, calling for Hunter Sung to look their way, asking how I felt as I embarked on Ahjin Guild's first raid, asking the story behind the name Ahjin, and asking about my relationship with Soohyun Yu, the third founding member. It was the first raid of my newly established Ahjin Guild, so reporters had been camping out since early in the morning to capture this historical moment on camera. Normally, employees of the guild on the raid would work crowd control, but in this case, the job had been assigned to association employees. I gestured at the masses and asked what happened to my information being classified.
We can protect your personal information, but we can't hide the location of a gate. We'll deal with the reporters, so please feel free to ignore them and focus on the raid.
For a moment, I had no answer. As I watched the association staff struggle to keep the reporters at bay, I knew who was behind all this. I asked Jinchul to tell the president that I really appreciated his help.
I'll let him know.
Jinchul bowed his head in acknowledgement, then turned and walked away, leaving me and Jinho by ourselves in front of the gate. I asked Jinho if he was sure he would be fine.
Yes, boss. I would follow you into hell.
I chuckled at how dramatic Jinho sounded and told him I appreciated it. Jinho was a D-rank hunter, which meant setting foot in an A-rank gate was practically a suicide mission. I had tried to stop him several times, but Jinho had insisted on being the porter. I eventually dropped it. If it was one person, I could easily keep him safe anyway. I figured Jinho would give up these missions after experiencing what it was like inside an A-rank dungeon. Besides, it would be nice to have someone to talk to. I asked if we should go.
Yes, boss.
I said we should go, but Jinho and I turned at the third voice behind us. There stood Jinchul, decked out in armor instead of his usual pressed suit. I told him I thought he had left.
President Go has asked me to monitor your raid to make sure it's truly safe, Hunter Sung.
President Go wanted Jinchul to act as a witness in the event there were more objections to my solo raids. I asked if Jinchul was planning to come with us.
If that's okay with you?
It was hard to tell whether Jinchul was blushing because he found the armor uncomfortable or because he was embarrassed by the circumstances. The man was just trying to do his job, so why not? I told him it was fine as long as he did not touch any magic beasts.
I'm a member of the surveillance team, am I not? I'll only be quietly observing.
Works for me.
I really appreciate this, Hunter Sung.
I said, all right then, let's go. With that, Jinho and Jinchul ventured inside the gate and I brought up the rear. As I did, the familiar system chime welcomed me and announced that I had entered the dungeon. The raid should have started by now. President Gun-hee-go looked at his wristwatch with a smile. Had it been possible, he would have liked to witness Hunter Sung's raid for himself, but his health did not allow it. Consequently, he had sent his most trusted employee in his stead. He could not wait to hear Manager Woo recount his experience. Gun-hee reminded himself that he did not have time for this and cleared his mind of meandering thoughts. There was a veritable tower of documents on his desk. No matter how focused on paperwork he had been following the dungeon break at the school, the stack had not decreased. In fact, it had grown. Despite his busy schedule, his interest in Jinwoo had not waned either. Maybe someday he would eventually get to tag along with Jinwoo. Gun-hee smiled ruefully at how silly that thought was, shook his head, and began focusing on the task at hand. He remained absorbed in work until 3 hours later, when a knock at his office door caught his attention.
Sir, it's me, Jinchul.
He had been waiting with bated breath for this report.
Come in.
When Jinchul carefully entered the room, Gun-hee stared at him, astonished. He had expected Jinchul to return no worse for wear, but the man looked haggard. Gun-hee wondered why Manager Woo was in such a state when he had been with Hunter Sung of all people. Jinchul's sincere plea snapped him out of his thoughts.
I apologize, sir, but may I sit down?
Of course, go ahead.
Gun-hee rose from behind his desk and took a seat on the opposite couch. Jinchul collapsed on the sofa. Exhaustion took hold as he rubbed his face with both hands. Gun-hee wondered what in the world had transpired inside that dungeon, then could not help himself.
What happened? Why do you look...
Sir, is there something on my face?
You just look very tired, like someone who hasn't slept for several days.
Oh, that is most likely because I am in a state of shock, Mr. President.
Shock, you say? Tell me everything. Didn't you get to observe Hunter Sung's raid?
Jinchul cast his eyes down and slowly shook his head.
That wasn't a raid.
Then,
Jinchul looked up with a mix of fear and incredulity in his eyes.
It was a massacre.
Jinchul, the courageous and charismatic manager of the surveillance team, made the proclamation with a trembling voice.
a massacre.
Yes, sir.
Massacre was the only word to describe what he had witnessed. Upon the president's request, Jinchul recounted the events without leaving out a single detail.
The dungeon happened to be a naga nest.
Gun-hee's eyes narrowed as he recalled details of the beast. He mentally reviewed that nagas were a cross between a human and a sea serpent, creatures that preferred wet environments and were skilled in both magic and physical combat. Hunters typically had difficulty dealing with them. Not only were they high-rank magic beasts, but they stayed in groups. However, Gun-hee figured that should not be much of an obstacle for a hunter like Jinwoo. Jinchul confirmed Gun-hee's analysis.
I almost felt bad for the nagas.
Gun-hee startled. When over 30 nagas had blocked their path, Jinchul had forgotten who he was with and briefly worried at the appearance of such troublesome beasts. But then,
Our surroundings grew dark.
to be precise, the shadow beneath Jinwoo's feet had spread out. Jinchul's hair had stood on end as the soldiers in black emerged from the ground. This had been the start of the battle, or rather the slaughter. The nagas hissed, and Jinwoo's minions jumped out and started mercilessly tearing them apart.
At least the humanoid minions in black armor and the high orcs showed some restraint.
The minions, shaped like bears and ants, had been brutally savage, just like wild animals.
Some of the ants were feasting on the dead bodies of the magic beasts, but Hunter Sung punished them for it.
A shiver ran up Jinchul's spine as he remembered how a shadow ant had slammed against a wall after a swift kick from Jinwoo for trying to swallow a dead naga's head whole. He could not tell if the shivers had been for the gruesome minion or because of the merciless disregard with which Jinwoo had sent it flying. Jinchul's agitation made Gun-hee himself feel restless.
Were the minions powerful?
Yes, they were.
They were without a doubt. Whether they resembled humans, orcs, bears, or ants, there was not a weak soldier among them. But one stood above the others.
There was a minion in a black helmet with a red mane. Would you believe that lightning struck from its sword with every swing?
Oh my.
Gun-hee was astonished. Lightning had the combined destructive power of fire magic and the speed of light magic. For that reason, only highly skilled mage hunters were able to wield it, and even then it was difficult to use consecutively. Hearing that lightning struck every time the minion swung its sword was hard to swallow, even coming from his most trusted employee. But that was not the only incredible piece of news.
From what I've seen, the minions seem to be far above an A rank.
Is that true?
Gunhee's voice rose sharply. It was unthinkable that a mere minion would be almost as powerful as an S rank.
I highly doubt I could defeat that minion in a one-on-one battle.
If the self-assured Jinchul had reached such a conclusion, then it was safe to assume the minion was an S rank. Gunhee leaned back on the couch. He was aware how extraordinary Hunter Sung was, but he had no idea his minions also held such amazing abilities. It was a pity he was unable to witness any of this with his own eyes. This was a lot to process for someone sitting comfortably on a couch, so how difficult must it have been for Jinchul to witness everything firsthand. No wonder the A-rank hunter was in such a state. It must have been shock after unrelenting shock for him.
But then something even more surprising happened. The ants went to work.
He blinked rapidly as he recounted this part. The vice president from the Ahjin Guild had distributed the pickaxes he had brought along to the ants. They had busied themselves with excavating magic stones from the cave walls and transporting those and magic beast corpses outside. Jinchul had been mesmerized, marveling at how the ants moved in such organized fashion. They were labor workers incarnate.
He isn't merely a one-man strike squad.
Jinwoo could attack a dungeon, collect the dead bodies of beasts, and excavate gems, so Jinchul was adamant that it was disrespectful to Hunter Sung to call him a one-man strike squad.
Hunter Sung is a walking guild.
The Ahjin Guild vice president had technically been there as well, but his absence would have had no impact on the raid. It was therefore fair to call Hunter Sung a one-man guild. Gunhee excitedly slapped his knee. He thought he had been right about Jinwoo. He could not stop smiling. Jinwoo would bring a new balance of power to the world of hunters in Korea and might even make waves on a global level.
After that, we arrived at the boss's lair.
Gunhee refocused his attention on Jinchul. There was more? The younger hunter explained that while Nagas were normally 2 to 3 times bigger than humans, the one in the lair was 4 times more massive than a regular Naga and absolutely intimidating.
I'm assuming the minions also defeated the magic beast boss in a flash.
Jinchul shook his head.
He actually dismissed all of them except the worker ants.
What? Why?
The president was dumbfounded.
I was curious too, so I asked Hunter Sung why he pulled back his minions right before the battle with the boss.
What did he say?
Jinchul took his time, as if calling up the memory, and said that I had answered, if I relied on the minions too much, I would lose my touch. I took a step and summoned the demon monarch's daggers to both hands. There was no need to use my soldiers. All that remained of the beasts were the boss and its 4 bodyguards. I slammed a foot into the ground and rushed forward. In a flash, I instantly closed the gap between myself and the boss before the bodyguards could react. I used mutilation. Dozens of pinpricks of light shot out of the lower half of the boss's body. As the boss screamed and struggled, its bodyguards leaped at me, and I used one of their heads as a springboard. I made eye contact with the extremely tall boss in midair and swung my daggers. An alert sounded as my target's head slid off its neck. The system chimed that I had defeated the master of the dungeon and leveled up. I was delighted at this notification. A quick spin as soon as I landed took care of the lackeys. Messages continued pouring in, and the chime would not stop ringing. I wondered what was going on, but my confusion did not last long. The system announced that I had reached level 101, and that my job-exclusive skills had leveled up. Shadow Extraction, Shadow Storage, Monarch's Domain, and Shadow Exchange had all reached level 2. My eyes widened at the stream of notifications. The job-exclusive skills had shown no signs of upgrade despite frequent use, and now they had leveled up all at once. My heart had not raced this fast in a while. Jinho and Jinchul were the only other humans in the boss's lair, and neither was inclined to question my actions, so I called up the status window without a second thought. The chime was accompanied by a complete overview of me, from my current level down to my equipped items. I paused at the list of the job-exclusive skills. It really happened. Seeing was believing. I was especially overjoyed at Shadow Exchange leveling up, finally. It was an extremely useful skill, but the lengthy cooldown period had been frustrating to deal with. The waiting period was supposed to change depending on the skill level, right? Now both the cooldown and my frustration would be reduced. This was the biggest gain from today's raid. I was happier about this than leveling up for the first time in a long while. I slowly opened the information window for the Shadow Exchange skill as if I were opening a gift. The system confirmed that Shadow Exchange level 2 could be used again after a 2-hour cooldown period. A full hour less. Leveling up once had cut down a third of the wait time. I could not hide my excitement. One level shaved off 1 hour. Assuming this was the general rule, the possibility that the waiting period would decrease to a single hour at the next level was quite high. And if the skill went up yet another level, Mom and Gina would be safe no matter where I was. I was almost vibrating with excitement at the idea, as their safety was my highest priority. Jinho smiled at my obvious glee and asked if something good had happened. I realized with a start that Jinho was standing next to me. I guessed I had been busy looking through the stats window. I spotted Jinchul walking toward us over Jinho's shoulder. I laughed to myself as I closed the status window. Although they would not have said anything, there was no reason to make them think I was out of my mind. I told Jinho it was something like that.
I see.
Working with Jinwoo had taught Jinho how to read the room, so he did not ask any more questions. He shifted his attention to the creature inside the room. This was the first time Jinho had seen an A-rank magic beast boss with his own eyes. It resembled a human from the waist up, but its lower body was that of a sea serpent. It looked huge even from a distance, but up close it was much bigger and much creepier. Jinho was understandably awestruck. Jinho thought about how Boss had been through several high-ranked dungeons already, and wondered if he had defeated terrifying beasts like this each time. Jinwoo seemed even more impressive than before, and Jinho was proud to be the one person with the privilege of standing beside the hunter like this.
Boss!
I answered him.
I truly respect you, boss.
I blinked, and Jinho turned away, mortified when I stared at him. Jinchul also appeared quite thunderstruck. He knew Hunter Sung was powerful, but he had not expected Jinwoo to deal with a boss-level Naga so easily. Any other strike squad would need a slew of tanks, damage dealers, and healers on top of their game to narrowly defeat such a threat. If another squad had witnessed this, they would hang their heads in shame. Jinchul fell silent for a moment, walked over to the Naga's remains, and tapped the beast's scales. They felt hard as steel to him. Well known for their durability, Naga scales were often used to craft defensive gear such as armor and shields. But against Hunter Sung, some of the scales on the lower half of the beast's body were crumpled or torn as if they were made of paper. This was the direct result of the mutilation skill. Jinchul could not believe Hunter Sung had this much destructive power using 2 daggers. Jinchul broke into a cold sweat as he inspected the carcass. It was a relief that Jinwoo was his ally. My voice came from behind him as I asked him to step aside.
Pardon.
I told him I would like to turn that Naga into a minion, but he was standing a little too close.
Oh.
Jinho, who already knew the drill, waved Jinchul over from where he was standing a short distance away.
Sorry.
Jinchul hurriedly stepped back, watching with anticipation all the while. He had seen Jinwoo create minions earlier on their way to the lair, but this would be his first time witnessing the process for a magic beast boss. He wondered whether that gigantic monster would transform into a minion of the same size. Jinho's eyes twinkled as he too awaited the result. I commanded the shadow to arise. The shadow answered my call. Black hands shot out of the beast's shadow and eventually pulled its body above the dark ground. However, the minion was much smaller than Jinchul had expected. The new shadow soldier was actually similar in size, or perhaps slightly bigger than a minion born of an ordinary Naga. Jinchul let out a short laugh as tension left his body, his sweaty palms an indication of just how nervous he had been. In a way, this was to be expected. How could a minion created with power borrowed from a dead body compare to the actual creature? The reduced strength and size of the minion made sense. Jinchul felt somewhat relieved at the sight and wondered whether this was the limit of Hunter Sung's abilities. Not that this meant he thought any less of the S-rank hunter. Jinwoo's combat power still surpassed Jinchul's imagination, and contrary to Jinchul's opinion, I was delighted with the results. The system announced that the voice of the monarch had awakened the dead's fighting spirit. Shadow enhancement was successful, and the shadow would start with a base level of 13. This was the first notification I had received about shadow enhancement since I had recruited Egress. Was this because shadow extraction had leveled up? I rushed to check the new soldier's information. The new shadow was level 13 and elite knight rank. Since this was the boss of an A-rank dungeon, it made sense the new shadow soldier was an elite knight rank just like Fang. But level 13, I could not stop smiling at the number. He was about as strong as he had been when he was alive. Maybe because of his level? Unlike other soldiers, I could not detect a difference between the soldier's abilities in its current form versus the original. The small frame hid a powerful amount of mana. I found it strange that there was such a big change in physical size, but I had a theory. Maybe this was his original form. Indeed, how could there be such a huge size discrepancy between the regular Nagas and the boss? Everything made sense if it had been using a magic spell to augment its size just as Fang often did. My theory was supported by the fact that this Naga also wielded magic, though it was not as strong as Fang. At that moment, the system asked me to choose a name. I did not think too hard and chose Jima. When the system asked whether I would like to use Jima, I confirmed it. With that, a powerful mage and his infantry of Naga became the newest additions to my shadow army. I absorbed Jima into my shadow once the extraction process was complete. Right on cue, the masterless dungeon sent them a preliminary warning. There was a small tremor signaling that the gate would close in the next hour. Jinho rushed over to me.
We have to leave, boss.
I answered that we should. Jinho took one last look around the lair and smacked his lips in disappointment. His eyes were fixed on the carcass of the magic beast boss.
It kind of feels like a waste. We could make so much money if we could take this with us.
With the gate closing soon, they would be taking a huge risk transporting the boss's corpse out of the dungeon. One mistake, and they would be lost inside it forever. It was near impossible to carry such a huge carcass anyhow, but it was harder seeing it get left behind. Talk about leaving money on the table. But I did not see the problem. I told Jinho we could just take it with us.
Huh? Isn't it too big to carry, boss?
I laughed and told him it was not a problem. I was not sure I had the muscle for the job, but I did know someone for whom it would not be an issue in terms of sheer size. I called Fang out. The robed shadow soldier who appeared was the former shaman of the High Orcs. Fang gave me a bow and I pointed to the cadaver with my chin. I ordered him to begin. Fang enlarged his body to twice the size of the Naga bosses in no time and began dragging it across the floor of the lair.
Whoa.
Jinchul was close to losing his mind at the unbelievable sight. He realized that was definitely the High Orc shaman he had watched Jinwoo defeat during the raid with the Hunters Guild. He was currently twice as big as when Jinchul had last seen him, but physical size was not the only difference. Jinchul had sensed a wave of mana from the minion when he cast the enlargement spell, and he was appalled to realize that the beast seemed to have gotten stronger compared to their last encounter. Jinchul wondered how a magic beast could get stronger when it was summoned as a minion. Not only could Jinwoo turn a master of an A-rank dungeon into a minion, but he could boost their power as well? None of this made any sense. I asked if manager Woo was coming, snapping the dazed Jinchul out of his thoughts.
Oh. I'm coming.
If shock shortened one's lifespan, Jinchul's had been cut in half. He had a mountain of questions he wanted to ask me but refrained from doing so for fear of the answers he might receive. The reporters were about to break for lunch when Jinwoo emerged from the gate. They wondered whether he was already done, and whether Hunter Sung had really cleared the A-rank dungeon in a mere 3 hours. A fire was lit under the reporters. This was a huge scoop. Every reporter with a camera dashed over to the gate so as not to miss Jinwoo, but hunters from the surveillance team blocked their path. The reporters yelled for the hunters to move aside, insisted they were not going to interview him, pleaded for just one picture, and warned that they would be fired if they missed Hunter Sung. As the struggle between the reporters and the surveillance team became heated, the sound of something heavy slamming onto the ground rang out. One reporter dropped his camera and another pointed at the gate, paying no attention to the camera cracking underfoot. He pointed at the enormous beast emerging from the gate. The reporters panicked, then shouted for pictures. They stopped fighting with the surveillance team and quickly started taking photos. Despite the fear of being attacked by this beast, they kept snapping pictures as if possessed by a higher power. Fang was working hard to drag the Naga carcass out of the gate. He felt countless gazes prickling at his back and slowly turned around, confused. Reporters, the police, association personnel, and even pedestrians passing by had all paused whatever they were doing to gawk at the giant. Fang bashfully rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed at the attention.